Kia ora koutou, everyone. I'm Elaine Kohler from Friends, and I'm pleased to have one of our Friends Life members, Tim Marshall, here with us today to talk about professional ethics. This is something that, as a Friends member, sets you aside or sets you apart from other PR practitioners, and that's the fact that you have all agreed to abide by a code of ethics. I'm going to pass you over to Tim for this webinar shortly, but I'm hoping that this is recording and we'll share the link with you tomorrow, all going well. And I'm hoping that it runs smoothly and there are no technical glitches due to operator incompetence, which is me. So we've got a few polls in the webinar, which we'll be launching as we go. But also, if you've got questions, please use the little dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen and type questions as you go. And depending how we're going for time, we will answer them as we go or hold them to the end. Over to you. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Elaine, and hi, everybody. This is a webinar that has been done before, so if you've been on it before, it'll be a repeat journey. Otherwise, it may be just new for you or just general revision on ethics. So just looking at our opening slide here, I remember Friends Life member Cedric Allen observing that to be a profession, a vocation must have a body of knowledge and a code of ethics. So our code of ethics is a foundation stone for our profession. As you can see, there's the subheading on this slide. Our code of ethics sets the behavioural standards for public relations and communication management practitioners that help us to win society's trust in our profession. And this is really important because public relations is not yet a regulated industry in New Zealand, and if we regulate ourselves well, we won't have heavy-handed government regulation coming down on us. And that's not impossible. It can happen, and it did for the real estate industry a number of years ago when Parliament lost confidence in the real estate industry's ability to self-regulate in a way that would protect the public's interests. So it's something for us as a profession to bear in mind. Having ethical standards and policing them is the starting point for winning the trust of society at large and the people we serve. I may make the point later on, but I'll make it here as well, is that the ethical standards, ethics, the nuances of ethics can change over time as customs and society changes. So it's a living thing, and it's something that we all need to agree on and buy into. Here we go. So, of course, ethics goes back in time for a long way. It's a branch of philosophy that addresses right and wrong. It's challenging, it's interesting, fascinating. There are a number of different branches of ethics, which we don't need to concern ourselves with too much, but it's interesting to just look at them very quickly. Virtue ethics and deontology, the first two there that I've bullet pointed, both focus on action rather than the outcome. So virtue ethics measures the actions against some given set of virtues. An example is Stoicism, which has virtues of wisdom, justice, fortitude and temperance, interesting old-fashioned words. Virtue ethics emphasises the character of the person making the actions. Deontology compares a person's actions against some duty. So deontology emphasises the character of the actions and is concerned with the means rather than the ends. Consequentialism, as the name might suggest, is concerned with whatever the best outcome might be for the action. For example, under utilitarianism, the goal is to take whatever action maximises happiness, regardless of the nature of the action. So consequentialism emphasises the ends, not the means. So I'm no expert in these matters. I'm not an ethicist. I'm a PR practitioner who has sort of fallen into this space. But I'm reliably informed that our code of ethics it falls into the deontology category. So it's a set of rules of conduct based on agreed common values for PRINZ members, which goes back to what I just said before. So why should we have a code of ethics? As I say in the slide there, the Code of Ethics formally sets out the principles and standards of conduct for public relations practitioners that provide guidance for the PRINZ members and our employers or our clients, and set reasonable expectations for society within which PRINZ members operate. So they do provide those guidelines and the boundaries, otherwise it can be a bit of a guessing game. So this tries to take some of the guesswork out of what we're doing, and as I say, it's something that we should be, as a profession, we should be revisiting, agreeing on, and getting into the detail of. Later on in this presentation, we'll look at some case studies and examples, which just shows some of the complexities that we need to consider with ethics. So the PRINZ Code of Ethics comprises 3 parts. We have an introduction, which spells out very succinctly, and this will come up in just a moment, what PR and communication management professionals do. Our previous Code of Professional Conduct, which predated the famous Timberlands case around the turn of the century, did not have this. It didn't have the introduction about PR practice. It didn't state what it was that we do, and so it was a piece that we felt was missing when we rewrote the code back then. The shortcoming in particular, the aforementioned Cedric Allen pointed out that we didn't have a piece in there about PR people being advocates for their organisations, and that needs to be stated. Second part is the values. So going back to the previous slides, our Code of Ethics is a deontological code. Ooh, got that word out. Because it's based on an agreed set of values that guide our behaviour. And as I've said, in organisation, we should be constantly checking these values and our behaviour against real life situations. Then there's the code itself, which is the rules of conduct, and they flow naturally from the values. The current set of Code of Ethics was written after the Timberlands case, which I'll talk about later, around the year 2000. And this case also coincided with reviews of the Code of Ethics of the Public Relations Society of America and also the Institute of Public Relations in the UK. So the rewriting of our code drew on their experience and was deliberately aligned with theirs. And so if you look at the PRSA codes or the IPR codes, you'll see similarities which are quite intentional.
Just to let all the attendees know that the Code of Ethics PDF has been uploaded to the handouts on the right navigation bar for you to download should you be interested. It is, of course, also available on the PRINZ website.
And furthermore, PRINZ is a member of the Global Alliance of Public Relations and Communication Management, along with how many other countries?
44.
44 other countries. So if you look at the Global Alliance website, you'll see that their code, our code aligns with the Global Alliance Code of Ethics as well. And in fact, I believe the Global Alliance has got a focus on ethics this month, which is partly the reason that we're running this webinar now. So, first section, if you think of that previous slide, this is the first part. As I said before, this is about just defining what it is that we do for the benefit of people outside of our industry. I was playing squash last night and said to one of my squash mates, I'm a PR man, and Peter said, what do PR people do? And it's a question that I'm sure you on this call have had many times. It's and the best way I always find is to actually give some examples of the work that we do. Otherwise, it's rather difficult to do in the abstract. So here's a succinct summary of what it is that PR and comms management people do. to set the scene both internally for our members and externally for the people who use our services. And interestingly, for the people who might protest about what we do, and for regulators and anybody else who takes an interest in our work. And typically with complaints, you find that they bubble up from quite unexpected places, as I think Elaine will confirm. I won't read out the introduction to the code. I'll leave you to do that, to skip through that. The second section is our values. So this is a brief 6-point summary of the values. These are the headings, but you can find them in full. All 12 values are on the PRINZ website in the Code of Ethics PDF, or as Elaine said, up on the sidebar of the webinar. So under advocacy, we serve the public interest by acting as responsible advocates for those we represent. It's interesting, we're contributing to public debate by being advocates for various different sectors of society. And with ethics, it does become a little bit cerebral. It's, the opportunity to look at first principles about what it is that we do. Honesty, being accurate and truthful. You'd think that would be fairly straightforward, but sometimes even that has peculiar aspects to it. Expertise. We have specialised knowledge, and the Code of Ethics relates to acquiring and responsibly using that specialised knowledge, and also about advancing the profession through research. We have an obligation to do that. Independence is about bringing objective counsel and being accountable for our actions. Loyalty to those we represent, safeguarding the confidences of not only our present clients and employers, but also our former clients and employers. And fairness includes respecting opinions and the right of free expression, which has been in the media spotlight from time to time. And in fact, we'll come up with an example about the right to free expression as we go through the webinar. Oh. Advocacy and honesty, that's right, that's fine. So, from those values, as I said, the values sort of flow through to the code itself, and this gives us an opportunity to delve into the code in some detail. So, looking at the first part of the code there, providing independent, objective counsel for our clients or employers at least, means we have a responsibility to provide expert advice on how to address the public relations and communications challenges our organisations face. We won't always have the answers, which is why being able to seek support or second opinions from our colleagues is important. Promoting the ethical and well-founded views of clients and employers means we have a responsibility to check that their views are well-founded. If there's reason to believe they are not, then again, we need to find ways to respectfully question and challenge our organisations. And this is hard. This is difficult stuff. Being honest and accurate in all communications seems pretty straightforward, but there'll be times when telling the truth is embarrassing because someone's done something that's not right, and jobs, livelihoods, or money are on the line. So there's motivation to cover up or mislead. And I think with things on the other side, though, if you look at things like product recalls, businesses are getting better and better than they were in the past at fronting up and telling the truth, because society has become more and more accepting of early admissions of failure, especially if organisations take responsibility to address the problem. So it's almost like we need to move to an environment or a society or a milieu where it's much easier to be honest and accurate in all our communications. And I think, if you look at the profession by and large, that could be one of our, one of our goals is to have a situation parallel to those product recalls where it's okay, it's much better, and the consequences of telling the truth aren't draconian, because that's typically why people don't do that. Avoiding deceptive practices. This one links to the above to some extent, and can come about because someone's done something wrong, something embarrassing to say, or because people are being pushed into doing something unachievable. Deceptive practices, though, also relates to, particularly with social media, if we think about not using your own name, for example, the nom de plume, and we wonder, those deceptive practices about praising your own client's products in social media or bagging a competitor's products under the guise of a nom de plume or a name which can't be traced. So let's have a look at some examples. This is a somewhat dated but interesting one nevertheless. When I've talked to PR practitioners about this before, we've had discussions about how the release of news is timed either to get picked up or to be overlooked, depending on whether or not it's good or bad for an organisation. So those are really interesting discussions, and it's, a lot of people say, well, it's pretty standard practice to put news out on a Friday afternoon or just before Christmas. So again, this is something that we need to, consider and discuss as a profession. Is that standard practice? Is it sharp practice? Is it, ethically acceptable? Where do we go with that? This one was, sharp practice. So just 11th of September 2001, a very familiar date for us. The Twin Towers had been hit, and before either tower had collapsed, Joe Moore, who was a special advisor to the British Transport, Local Government and Region Secretary Stephen Byers, sent an email to the press office of her department saying it's now a very good day to get out anything we want to bury. And I think it's probably the sort of thing that a lot of people would think but not say, and that was her undoing, was the fact that she actually emailed this out. And the email wasn't leaked to the press until nearly a month later, but it provoked a media storm, predictably dubbed Spingate, and Moore was forced to apologise. So we've got a potential poll here, which I'll hand over to Elaine to see if she can run it, and we'll just have a little bit of fun and see how the results come out.
Okay, so our poll is launching now, so it should pop up. Would you say that sending out bad news on a big news day is? So we're just waiting for everyone to vote. We're still waiting on a few more. We can see the numbers coming in.
So what I'd just say is it's not a test, and just what your honest opinion, and it's to stimulate thought. So let's say a few more 10, 20 seconds to finish off, and we'll give you the results when they...
And we can't see who's voting what way. Okay, so we see that most people have voted, and so we'll close it now. 29% said deceptive, thus unethical. 0% said acceptable practice, and 71% said it depends. So I'm just going to close that now.
Well, that's interesting. It'll be interesting to go back over previous webinars because we've asked the same question and do comparisons. But it's I mean, what that really highlights is that there are, there are expectations on us to do certain things in the way we behave, and it would be interesting if the public, the spotlight was shone on the things that we do as PR practitioners, and these sort of things became totally unacceptable. That it was a requirement that news was put out as soon as it was known. Anyway, that's something to think on. Let's flick on to the next. I just have to close the poll, and then we'll flick to the next slide. So I can read it to you while we're just waiting for that to come up. In May 2012, the government set 10 better public service goals. Yeah, right there. So these were their 10 top focus areas for the public service. One of these goals was a super stretch goal to reduce criminal offending by 25%, even though people who know the sector well, like Kim Workman, I think he's been knighted now, I think might be Kim Workman, who heads an organisation, or did at the time, called Rethinking Crime and Punishment, said a realistic target for reducing criminal offending was 5%. Sorry, criminal reoffending was 5%. When the goal was announced, 2 corrections department statisticians resigned, and we're led to believe this was because they could not see how the target could be achieved without changing the way corrections counted criminal reoffending. Kim Workman claims corrections then spent 3 years manipulating their statistics, including reducing the time span for reoffending from 2 years to 1 year, and saying breaches of parole and probation should not be counted in the statistics. So in other words, what we were comparing apples with oranges, if you look at those previous stats. For academics who are interested in this area, comparing the new and the old stats here was like comparing apples and oranges, and they had to turn to the Salvation Army's Social Policy Unit for better stats. In May 2017, 5 years after the introduction of the Better Public Service goals, the government announced a 4.5% reduction in reoffending, although that was over the lower goalposts they'd set by changing the rules. The reoffending goal was withdrawn and other goals were introduced. So the question this time, I'll hand over to Elaine again, and again just to answer honestly from your perspective, this is a provocation for us to think hard about the actual implementation of the code in day-to-day situations. Bearing in mind the code says members shall provide independent, objective counsel to clients and employees. Are we actually able to do this? So if PR Comms is required to announce fudged data, is it dishonest and thus unethical? Not their responsibility? Or are you undecided? Maybe you don't have enough information from this one, or you think that we should accept the word of our organisations? Man, we're streaming in.
So most people have voted now, and 100% of you said dishonest, thus unethical. I'm sorry, I can't get the polls to display on screen, but so yeah, 100% dishonest.
Well, there we go. I hasten to add that this is my characterisation of corrections actions, and people may dispute my characterisation of it, which I'm more than happy to have that disputed. I mean, in some ways, it's an exercise for us to consider, but close to reality. Let's move on to conflicts of interest, the second item in the code. A member shall disclose promptly any existing or potential conflict of interest to affected clients or organisations, and disclose any client or business interest in published or broadcast editorial work. If you do this up front, it'll keep you out of a lot of hot water. I know from my personal experience that this can be a challenge for consultancies who build up expertise in a particular sector, but may be denied the opportunity to work on other clients in that sector because existing clients perceive a conflict of interest, even though this may not exist. So in my circumstances, my consultancies developed quite a lot of expertise in the information technology and pharmaceuticals areas. And with the information technology one, we actually had a division of telecom, which was one of our clients. And whenever I'd approach my key contact within that business or that division of telecom, showing the age of the client there, calling it telecom, he would just say, "Sorry, Tim, that's a conflict of interest." And so as long as he perceived it was a conflict of interest, we were really stymied in terms of growing our business in any area that was even vaguely related to theirs. He was a good guy, and when I had to buy a brush stick fence some years later, I was offered by the salesperson a 20% discount on this brush stick fence for my batch. And I thought, what's going on here? And hello, Clive had moved out of telecom and moved in and bought a brush stick fence company and said, "Here we go, Marshall." Anyway, that's an aside. With my pharmaceutical clients, it was a different situation actually, because they dealt in different areas. So one was in sort of antibiotics, one was in cancers, and those clients were able to coexist. So I hope I haven't spent too much time dwelling on my personal circumstance, but I'm sure people who work in consultancy will be familiar with that circumstance. Let's have a look at a conflict of interest example, really interesting one from a few years ago now, which you may recall. So the background is that EY, one of the big four consulting firms, took on the sponsorship of the National Business Journalism Awards. So it seemed like a logical thing to do for EY to build a profile and relationships with the business media, but it obviously wasn't thought through as well as it could have been, should have been. NBR journalist Karen Shearer put in an entry alleging into alleged accounting irregularities at photocopier printing company Fuji Xerox. The problem is that the company was an EY client. EY decided the best thing to do was to withdraw Karen's entry from the awards. And when they did that, Rebecca McPhee, who was an independent judge on the judging panel and an experienced journalist, resigned in protest, and other journalists from NBR, NZME, and Fairfax, as it was then, withdrew their entries in solidarity, and they wrote stories about it. So what was meant to be a profile building exercise and relationship building exercise for EY ran afoul of the way that they ran it. So again, to get your grey matter moving, if you were doing public relations for EY, how would you have dealt with this situation?
Just waiting for the votes to come in. It's clearly more considered this time compared to the previous poll. Okay, so we will close that now. So 50% said to offer to reinstate Shearer's award entry. 13% said recommend EY shut down the awards, and 38% said don't know or some other course of action. So clearly a bit more complex.
That's interesting. I'm pretty sure that EY did shut down those awards, so I think that was the end of them. Another thing with all of this, it's interesting to consider whether EY's PR people were actually involved in this, the formulation of this award, because I think good PR people could have probably foreseen this, that, if you were having business awards and those business awards are open to bad news stories, as journalism is at least half bad news, what's that going to mean? And EY being one of those big consulting firms would have a huge spread of clients, and the chances were reasonably high that they would have clients who are being talked about in these stories, and what were the implications of that. So yeah, it's a really strong argument for PR people to be involved in these situations. Okay, professionalism. Let's run through the professionalism section. A member shall actively pursue personal and professional development. You're doing that right now by being on this webinar, which is good on you. And you should sign up for PRINZ's professional development program as well. And you're the sort of people who would be anyway, so that's all good. Explain realistically what public relations activities can accomplish. Don't oversell. It's not good for you or the profession's reputation. James and Laurie Grunig, who names that will be familiar to you as leading PR academics from the States. One of Laurie Grunig's big things was about PR people overselling what they could achieve in pitches. That was one of her biggest ethical bugbears and concerns. Counsel colleagues on ethical decision making and decline representations of clients of organisations that urge or require actions contrary to the code. You could argue that these were a bit circular, but they reinforce your responsibilities to yourself, your colleagues, and to the profession. Something that Joseph Peart talked about quite a lot was the loyalty to the profession ahead of to loyalty to unethical clients or employers. Finally, to not engage in irrelevant or unsubstantiated personal criticism. And boy, this is something that's, in the last 4 years of the American president, this is an interesting one, isn't it? So you absolutely may and you should attack the arguments or the logic, evidence, or whatever your belief system is, but this should be done respectfully. So let's have a look at an example of this one. Oh, did we have an example of this too? Oh, maybe we've got out of order a little bit. This was Don Brash here. Let's look at forward, maybe. Here we go. So this is, again, a couple of years ago. I must update my examples, but nevertheless, it's a good one. Don Brash speaking publicly. There's controversy surrounding the speaking rights of 2 Canadian visitors. I don't know if that's still in your memory. And then soon after, Don Brash was denied the opportunity to speak on Massey University's campus. Subsequently, did he go on to Auckland University's campus? I think yes, he did speak on Auckland University campus in the year he was interrupted by protesters. So going back to respecting the rights of others to have their say, I've got a couple of questions for you here.
So we're still waiting for some of the votes to come in. So the question, should the right to speak lawfully, i.e. not inciting violence, etc., also have a responsibility not to speak about touchy topics? Yes, no, can't say. So as the results, 11% said yes, 67% said no, and 22% said can't say.
No, that's
So
pretty
that's there.
pretty strong endorsement. I will skip the next one, I think. Yeah, because otherwise we get a little bit too behind. But yeah, that's a pretty strong endorsement that we should be able to talk about difficult subjects. That's heartening. I like that. So I've given you a link there from Massey University's Chris Gallivan, who wrote a very thoughtful piece about the principles of discussion and the ability to disagree well. I really, encourage you to go and look at that and read it. Really good piece. So let me go back to it now. Go to questions. No, we did that. We did
This one.
Balancing openness and privacy. Let's do that. Okay. Feel good?
Yeah.
This is a huge area because we have acts of parliament requiring openness, like the Official Information Act, and private companies also have disclosure responsibilities if they're listed on the stock exchange. And on the other hand, we have the Privacy Act, which is designed to preserve people's right to personal privacy. So it's too big a topic to cover right now, but I'd strongly encourage you to familiarise yourselves with the statutory requirements around openness and privacy as a baseline. And then we have the respecting people's rights to have their say. So I've sort of jumped onto that Don Brash thing. Then being prepared to name clients or employers. You have to say who you represent when you contact the media or any other stakeholders on behalf of your organisations. People don't always know that you, as a PRINZ member, you are required to name clients or employers represented. And finally, and you have the right to refuse. Unlike lawyers, you don't have to take on clients. And finally, in this section, safeguarding the confidences and privacy rights of present, past, and prospective clients and employers, because sometimes you'll go into situations where you will learn about things from prospective clients and employers that you must maintain the confidences. Okay, let's keep moving. I might come back to Timberlands. Should we do Timberlands? Okay, let's do Timberlands. This was the one which led to the rewriting of the code in around 2000. So in the late 1990s, early 2000s, government state-owned enterprise Timberlands used PR consultants to lobby government and build public support for logging of West Coast native beech forests. So just to explain, as a state-owned enterprise, Timberlands was required to do this logging, and there was an obligation to try to pay a dividend to the government. Timberlands management were determined to do what was required of them in this regard, to pay that dividend if they possibly could and log those forests. And Timberlands hired a PR consultancy to lobby government and build public support. On the other side of the coin were conservationists who did not want the West Coast beech forest to be logged, and so they organised tree sit-ins, put their point of view to politicians and the media, graffitied walls in Wellington with slogans against Timberlands logging. The people who were against the logging ranged from activists who were prepared to break the laws to promote their cause, through to mild-mannered, often elderly forest and birders whose strongest action would be writing letters to newspaper editors. So the writers of a book, Secrets and Lies, Bob Burton and Nicky Hager, accused the consultants of unethical behaviour. and they laid complaints with PRINZ, which were heard by a PRINZ ethics panel and subsequently reheard by a high-ranking lawyer, Hugh Rennie QC. And at the end of the day, here are 4 of Hugh Rennie's rulings, which you can read right there. Harbour and Burton said the consultancy had paid a student to attend private meetings of the University Environment Group and report back to the consultancy, essentially to spy on the group. This was ruled as unethical. They said the consultancy, interestingly, even though those meetings were meetings that anybody could easily walk into them. But the ruling was that the purpose of the consultancy representative was not to further the cause of the meeting, therefore it was fine. Interesting. They said the consultancy had a policy of describing all opponents as extremists, regardless of whether they were activists, who could probably be fairly described that way, or the mild-mannered opponents to the lobbying who could not. The code was rewritten partly as a result of this very case, but this complaint would fit under the irrelevant or unsubstantiated personal criticism clause. This was ruled unethical. Harbour and Burton said the consultancy drafted letters for members of a pro-logging West Coast advocacy group called Coast Action Network to sign. And the allegation here was that Coast Action Network was really just a front for timberlands, not really a grassroots community organisation. And this is often referred to as astroturfing, where PR firms or organisations set up organisations that appear to be independent but aren't. In this case, Hugh Rennie and Coast Action Network, Hugh Rennie said that Coast Action Network was a genuine organisation and that helping to draft the letters was a legitimate PR activity. And there was a complaint that the consultancy was too aggressive in the language it used in the media, but that was ruled to be not over the top. Sorry, I'll put out all here. All right, have we done all right here? Right. And finally, law-abiding, and that's essentially to say a member shall abide by the laws affecting the practice of public relations and the laws and regulations affecting the client. And this, I won't say a lot more about, apart from to say that, well, a little bit about it in the next slide, it does require a bit of SWOT. You won't ask that question. So you can look at this slide yourself, but it is our responsibility to get up to speed with the rules governing whatever sector we're working in. For example, Commerce Commission rules for anybody who's working in business, regulated industry, on what they can and can't say and do. There's a very good video from the Commerce Commission called "If You Can't Back It Up, Don't Say It." So wherever you promote or sell your goods and services, you must use accurate and clear information. I recommend that to you. It's not only words, it's pictures. Think of images of nature on harmful chemicals. The old classic dolphins and greenery to make people look that they're okay. So that you don't even need to say anything if you have those images that suggest something that can breach Commerce Commission rules. If you work in the food industry, you need to know the food standards. Just as an example, Australia and New Zealand product recall requirements. If you work for a publicly listed company, you need to know the rules for the relevant stock market, like the New Zealand Stock Exchange. So any area that you work in will have its own rules and regulations, which you need to familiarise yourself with. How does the complaints process work? This very quickly, and Elaine might be able to help me with this if we've got any questions. The complaint will be received by the National Office. Note that anybody can lay a complaint. You don't have to be a PRINZ member. So by being a PRINZ member, you are laying yourself open to complaints from anybody. The first step is that options for resolution of the complaint might be considered, particularly if it appears to be a dispute situation. If the complaint can't be resolved and is not frivolous, it will proceed to a hearing by the independent chair, Ursula Chair, who has been our independent chair for a long time now.
Yeah, she is Dean of Law at Canterbury University.
Yeah. And Ursula will be accompanied by 2 PRINZ fellows who aren't conflicted with the case. The complainant and the defendant cases will be heard. a decision is reached and announced, penalties for breaches are expulsion, that's the most serious, or censure, which is colloquially a telling off. We have very few ethics complaints, but for practitioners, the burden of a complaint even being laid is really quite high, even if you're found not to be in breach, because people, you know, if we publicise the fact that the complaint has been made, then people will know, and that's you know, really, it's really tough on people. One of the things that Elaine has instituted is actually a support system for PRINZ members who have complaints laid against them, just to help them through that whole process, because it's not nice. So it really pays to stay clear of any risk of a complaint being laid. Okay, so having gone through the code and seen those examples, let me quickly run through some practical advice. Here we're going for time. Okay. So the things that I would say is familiarise yourself with the code and examples, and I should add with the law and regulations. Keep your ethical radar on for anything that seems dodgy. Be aware of anything involving subterfuge, you know, obfuscation, anything that's clouding the facts of an issue, derision. You know, for example, programmatically calling people extremists when they're not, and assumed identity. So, whoops, I've covered those things without having the slide up. Never mind, we're short of time, we're moving on. When an ethical dilemma occurs, apply the front page of the newspaper test. If you are publicly named for your actions, would you be embarrassed or ashamed? Consult with PRINZ colleagues, really handy. Explain the consequences of reputation damage to your employer or client. And remember, as Joseph Peart said, that professional ethics beats loyalty to unethical employers. Behaving ethically is easy when times are good and you work for a decent organisation, but it's not always the case, is it? We know that when a crisis strikes, there's temptation to say, ooh, maybe we won't talk about that because we made a muck up. Or when protesters attack your reputation, or when the organisation demands whatever it takes to beat your competitors, you know, just get out there and do it. And, you know, that can lead to unethical behaviour. I'm going to skip this next slide. You can look at it yourselves. But what I will say, I'll point out this ethics pyramid, which is Elspeth Tilley's great work. And the significance of this is to systematically build ethical behaviour into each stage of your PR or communication management program, starting with the research stage at the bottom of the pyramid, through to your objective setting and planning stage, then through to the implementation stage, and finally at the top of the pyramid with your results and evaluation stage. So if you can implement this holistic ethical approach in the way you work, you'll be moving away from the risks associated with ad hoc observation and knee-jerk reaction to ethical situations, and you'll have your organisation on board with you. So this is comprehensive, systematic ethical approach, and I really recommend this to you in your organisations. And then finally, to finish, we've just got a few PR sort of developed its own ethics vocabulary, greenwashing, which I mentioned before, astroturfing also mentioned, and another couple, flogs and blogola, you know, paying for sponsored comments on blogs. When we're moving into this whole territory now with, you know, the way that PR works with, you know, the difference between paid, what is it, paid, earned, shared and owned, you know, the boundaries being blurred. And finally, reference matter, and there's a bunch of stuff there that you can have a look at, but I really, the bottom bullet point, it's a 4-minute video from Matt Peacock, who's Vodafone Group Director of Corporate Affairs. Really neat little thing where he was talking at a European conference about being the conscience of the organisation, and more than that, almost being an investigative journalist, PR people delving into the things that are going on. So this is as much for, you know, crisis management as it is for PR issues. Okay.
Thanks, Tim.
A bit blustery at the end there, but we've got there.
So we'll just see if anybody has any questions. We've got a question. Do many complaints come through? I'll answer that. So the short answer is no, not really. The longer answer is we actually get quite a few complaints, but we can't act on them because the people that the complaints have been made against aren't Friends members. So a lot more complaints about PR practitioners who are not members of Friends. The complaints vary significantly in terms of what they are about. Sometimes they're contractually related, sometimes they are behaviourally related. They vary significantly. Of the complaints that come through, I think off the top of my head, Friends in the last 20 years has had 10 complaints, 10 or 11 complaints go through the complaints process, of which a handful have actually gone through to a ruling. Many are withdrawn or not progressed due to lack of evidence. And of the complaints, only a few are upheld. Some of them are not upheld. So it is, and they are all very, very different. The complaints remain completely confidential until a final decision has been made. As you can imagine, should the details of a complaint be made public before they've gone through a whole process, people might be judged unfairly or things. So yeah, the short answer is not many complaints. Yeah, it's interesting. Another question. What would your advice to a practitioner be if they are asked by their employer to act in a practice or unethical manner?
Well, we've got a whole section on that in this presentation, and one of them is to spell out the consequences of that unethical behaviour. Well, the first thing is actually to say that you're a Friends member, you have signed up to the Code of Ethics. It's quite likely that you're, did you say that's an employee?
Yeah.
It's quite likely, quite possible that your employer will have actually paid for your Friends subscription. So sometimes when you're asked to behave unethically, it's because of ignorance on the part of the employer. They just aren't aware of the code, they don't understand the implications of it. So the first thing is to make them aware that the code exists and to show it to them, and that may be enough for them to go, oh, I'm sorry, shouldn't have asked you to do that. If they persist and say, well, I don't believe that that's the contravention of the code, or even if it is a contravention of the code, then I'd like you to behave this way, then it's good to explain the consequences of those actions. And the consequences won't just fall on you as a practitioner, they'll quite often fall on the organisation as well. You know, they can be quite serious, and you know, so we talked about that front page of the newspaper test. At the end of the day, though, if an employer insists on your behaving unethically and you've confirmed with colleagues and others that that course would be an unethical course to take, there's probably not a lot you can do if you want to retain your Friends membership and continue to be an ethical practitioner, but to part company with that organisation, which would be very sad.
And there's another question about the Timberlands case and what it refers to, but I think Tim covered a lot of that off in bullet points. I also suggest you Google it, but add in Nikki Hager, because otherwise you'll get a whole lot of Timberland boots appear in your search. But yeah, you can Google public relations, Timberland, and I think there's quite a big Wikipedia page on it as well.
I've actually got a copy of the book at home, which I could give to Elaine, and so she could lend it to you. I could bring that in, and if you're really interested in reading it, you're welcome to borrow the book from Friends.
It's an easy read, entertaining, easy read. That's it for now, I think. Industry rules, regulations. We have links on our site to some of them, and I know there were links on the website. We don't actually keep rules, regulation on our sites, rather just links through to those applicable ones. It would be too hard for us to keep them updated all of the time. So obviously our code of ethics are up there. We also have one for online engagement as well, with a link through to some of the relevant ones, applicable rules and regulations there.
Certainly, if you're working in any food safety, pharmaceuticals, anything to do with, to the health and safety, there are all sorts of regulations now. Now those are not necessarily ethical issues, but breaches of those could lead to, concerns, if there were then cover-ups and all the rest of it. So, yeah, definitely any practitioner needs to familiarise themselves with all the rules and regulations related to the industries that they're working with.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, and we will hopefully be sending out a link to the recording of the webinar in the next day or so. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, Tim.
And I look forward to your comments on suggestions of how we could improve the presentation next time. Thanks again. Bye.